Today on the Speech and Language Kids podcast, we are talking about atypical disfluencies, such as stuttering at the ends of words and breathing mid-word, sound interjections. We're going to be covering a lot of different things. And this comes from a question I had on our Submit a Case review. So this is our very first case review. We're trying out a new format on the podcast. So we're going to find out how this goes and how you guys like it. But basically, I was able to ask for some feedback. I got some case reviews submitted to me, and I looked through and found one that I thought was a good one to feature on the podcast. And so this comes from one of our listeners, and I'm going to answer her question about her specific situation today. But if you would like to submit a case review, I need your questions. The way that this works is if I get lots of good questions so I can see some patterns and see what people are asking about the most and be able to answer those. So if you have a tough case, if you have a job-related question such as scheduling or collaborating with teachers and parents or evals, IEPs, any of that stuff, you can submit a request through our website. So if you go to speechandlanguagekids.com/submit, SUBMIT, just keep in mind a couple of things. We have to keep privacy in mind. So do not provide me any identifying information. If the parent were listening to the podcast and could tell we are talking about their child, it is too much information. So yes, I need lots of information to be able to answer the questions. However, I don't want so much that a parent could identify their own child in that situation. Now, if it's that does reflect my child, but also reflects a lot of other children, that's okay. But if it is so specific that we would know, please don't include that. Also, I won't include your name or email address in the podcast, so that will help with privacy as well. And then also just keep in mind, I can't provide specific recommendations for a specific child that I have not worked with. So the recommendations I'm going to be giving are the general ones. I'm going to be digging through the research and find what the research says about those particular types of challenges. I'm going to be talking about what's worked with my past clients and brainstorm ideas that I have of the places I might start when working with a child, but I cannot tell you specifically what will or won't work for that child. I also cannot make any diagnoses. All right. So keep that in mind, but head over to speechandlanguagekids.com/submit and you can submit your case reviews. I need those to make the podcast good for this format. So you're not bothering me. Please submit some requests. Okay, so today's question, our listener says she's seen an alarming increase in atypical disfluencies in the student population at her school. Characteristics include word final repetition, mid-word pausing or breathing, such as we, and there, and sound interjection between words. Okay, so she's asking about strategies for this and also just interested if other people are also seeing this. And based on the questions I've been getting, I think so. I have seen a lot more questions about atypical disfluencies among our audience lately than I used to. And so I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's actually more common or maybe we're just all tuning into it a bit more. But today I sat down and I dug into the research on this. And let me tell you, the research on this is kind of a hot mess. There are a lot of conflicting recommendations from different experts in this area. For example, I saw one expert who was saying, don't ever work on breathing. I've seen other experts saying, definitely work on diaphragmatic breathing. So there's a lot of conflicting recommendations. And a big part of that is because there's not a lot of specific wide-scale studies on this particular issue. So as with other issues that are maybe more rare or less researched, our job becomes being a detective, right? So we're not going to know one way that is going to work for every child with atypical disfluencies. We're going to have to kind of piece it together based on what we're seeing in front of us. But I'm going to give you some strategies today to do that and some of the different things you can try. So I feel like I use this analogy a lot, but we're going to put some tools in your toolbox today, and you are going to have all those tools available to you to try. And then you're just going to take really good data and pay attention and observe and see which strategies the child responds to. Those are the ones that are going to work for that child, right? So that's where we're going to head today. So what are atypical disfluencies? Well, as I was looking through the research, we had a couple different types. So there were mid-word breaks where they just pause in the middle of a word, like become. There were mid-word repetitions, come. There were sound insertions, so that would be come. And then we had final sound or syllable repetition, so like become or become and then final sound prolongations, become. All right, so those were all the ones listed. We also have disfluencies that are atypical disfluencies that occur with breathing, where they kind of seem like they're gasping for a breath, either mid-word or in between words. We also see sometimes sound interjections between words or in the middle of words. So there's a lot of different ways that this looks, and therein lies the problem, right? These are atypical, so they're not following any particular patterns. And when we look at the specific research that has been done in this area, it's a lot of small studies. It's case studies of one child. I had this one child and he was doing this one thing, and here's what I observed and here's what I noticed. And so I think it's this. And someone else says, well, I observed one child, but it was this other thing. And so that's where all of this conflicting information is coming from, is just because there's a lot of different reasons that these atypical disfluencies may occur. And so there's a lot of different strategies we can use, which is a great thing, right? Because that means we have a lot of tools in our toolbox that we can try. We just may not know which one's going to be best right from the start. So let's look at what the research does say and what some of these studies are showing. So we definitely are seeing some link in some of the studies that says this is more common in children with autism and ADHD. Those neurodivergent children, the ones with brain differences, these types of disfluencies are more common in those children. Why? We don't know, but something about the way the brain is wired is different. We also see that this can happen alongside stuttering. So actual stuttering disfluencies, developmental stuttering, neurogenic stuttering. It happens along with typical stuttering behaviors. It also can happen alongside cluttering, which is when they speak very rapidly and collapse sounds and have lots of sound errors and phonological errors and sometimes grammatical errors all smushed together because they're smushing the speech. It can also happen by itself. So it seems to be its own thing that can occur concurrently with stuttering, cluttering, speech problems, language problems, all of these other pieces, right? So it does kind of seem to be its own thing since it can happen by itself, but it does also seem to be caused by any number of different reasons. And here is where the research is not definitive and we are seeing a lot of conjecture, but this is based on real experiences with real children and teens where we say, I suspect it might be this type of problem. And then we treat that type of problem and it goes away. And we say, okay, that must have been it, right? So this is still research-based. It's just that there's a lot of different findings, okay? So different things that might cause this or might be contributing to this: language processing problems, word finding problems, motor planning. There's some phonological components. It could be a regulation and anxiety thing. It could have to do with medical reasons, such as breathing problems, right? So there's all these different things that we can look at and we can evaluate to make sure that we're finding the root cause and not just treating a symptom. Okay, that being said, there's even more strategies and they're even more scattered than the causes, the presumed causes, okay? So there's a lot of different things we can try and there's a lot of different things we can look at. Okay, so what do we do? Let's get down to it. So the first thing we need to do is just become a detective. If we adopt a mindset of curiosity, number one, that takes the pressure off us to be perfect. I know you all want to be perfect, but we're not. So we adopt a mindset of curiosity and we say, okay, I'm just going to get curious. I'm going to get curious about this child's repetitions, about their breathing challenges, about their disfluencies. And we want to look for patterns or triggers, any data that we can collect, any information we can collect about how it's happening, why it's happening, when it's happening. So we can look for specific sounds or word types. I saw some research that said, oh, this child only did it on when the word ended in these sounds, or the child only did it on nouns, right? Like there was very specific patterns that they found in this research. We can also look at specific triggers or situations. I don't think I've said this yet on this one, but my own son has word final repetitions, and he has since he was a preschooler, kind of that same age where developmental stuttering begins, but he never did developmental stuttering. He did this instead. And so I actually use his stuttering as a gauge of how stressed out he is, because I can tell when we are going through high transition times, when there's something big going on in his life, the stuttering gets worse. And so I can tell how regulated he is based on the stutters, or the word final repetitions. So looking at specific situations and triggers like that, does it happen more when they're stressed, when they're tired, when they're excited? Cognitive load plays into this a lot, right? If you're just having a normal conversation, not a lot of pressure, typically we see fewer disfluencies. If we are asking them to describe the rules to their favorite game with a time constraint, you have 30 seconds, tell me all the rules to this game, you're going to see a lot more of those disfluencies if it is a child who is prone to disfluencies, and even sometimes with children who are not prone to disfluencies. So looking at those kinds of things can help. Also, ask parents and teachers what they're noticing. They are often seeing these patterns, and if you start to ask questions, they will either start to tune in and start looking for patterns that they can tell you, or they may already have some observations, like me and my own son saying, oh yeah, it always is worse when he's stressed, right? And then ask the child. If they are old enough to participate in this, ask them what they notice and why they think they do it. And so this can be as simple as you're having a conversation with them and they do a repetition. You say, oh, I heard you say that sound over and over again like this. Stop. I wonder why you did that. And just see if they have any ideas. I have asked my own son this, and he says, well, I'm trying to think of the next word. And so that's my thinking sound. And I love that because it's so self-aware for a child who, let's be honest, is not super self-aware sometimes. And he said this a couple years ago. He's 9 now. So he wasn't even that old when he was starting to make these observations about his own speech. So asking the child if they noticed it and why they think that happened. Not in an accusatory way, not in a way where we're shaming them, but just, I'm curious. I heard that sounded like this. Or if that's too confrontational for a child, you can do it in your own speech. So I think I'm going to stop up at the store. Oh, I said up a lot of times there. Why do you think I did that? Because they may be internalizing it about themselves, but not willing to talk about themselves, but they'll be sure to tell you what you're doing wrong, right? So this whole idea is become the detective. See if you can look for some patterns. See if we can start to tease out if there are some underlying things going on that may be contributing to this. My suspicion, and this is total guesswork here, but my suspicion is that some kids' brains are wired to be more likely to have these challenges, such as those with autism and ADHD. And if the right circumstances are present, then it manifests, right? So whether that's the language delays or some sort of anxiety or stress response or, whatever it is, but it's like there has to be all the right conditions for it to present, right? So that's my suspicion. Okay, you've become the detective. So what's next? The second thing we need to consider is whether or not it actually needs to be treated. Okay, so this one I think can be really hard when we're in our clinical mindset because our clinical brain says, time to fix this. We got to fix all these things. Here's all the things I'm noticing. Fix, right? But fluency is different. In my mind, fluency is a difference, not a disorder. And I know that the DSM would disagree with me and doctors might disagree with me. And that's okay. Everybody gets their own opinion on this, I guess. But the way I look at it, stuttering is just a different way of communicating. Stuttering is not inherently bad. People who stutter are not evil. There's nothing that says we have to fix this, okay? What we see with the atypical disfluencies, in particular the word final repetitions, is that a lot of the times the children aren't even aware that they're doing it, or if they are aware, it does not bother them. They're not upset by it. they're still able to say what they want. And honestly, sometimes it serves as a placeholder to let the listener know that they still have another thought coming up. And it actually makes their communication a little more effective because they're not getting cut off because someone thought they were done. I'm not saying that that's always the case, but if it's not bothering them or they're not even aware they're doing it. And a lot of times these disfluencies are not super noticeable. They're not as noticeable as typical stuttering where someone's stuck at the beginning of a word because they've already got their message out. It's just kind of like a little echo. So for example, they might say, I'm going to go to the store or. And if you're not really listening for it, a lot of times you don't even notice it. I have asked other people who are not speech language pathologists about my son and if they notice it. And most of the time they do not. They go, does he do that? I was like, yeah, listen. And they're like, oh, because your brain just kind of filters out extra noise anyway. And so a lot of times if the message gets out clearly, it doesn't matter if parts of it are repeated. And so it's not as noticeable anyway. So what we want for our clients or for our students or our children, we want them to be able to communicate confidently. We don't want them to be perfect. Perfect is not the goal. And a lot of the research that I saw today when I was looking through this says that these tend to resolve on their own. Now, I don't think that's always the case. I did see a couple of studies that cited adults with developmental disabilities who were still having disabilities as adults with this type of disfluencies. But a lot of them seem like they're resolving on their own. Okay, so aggressively treating this, forcing the child to acknowledge, hey, you need to acknowledge that you're doing this, that this is happening, can actually make it worse because now you're putting pressure on them. And we know that pressure makes disfluency harder. If we don't need to necessarily make a big deal out of it, if it doesn't need to be a big deal. And so I think this is a gray area in speech language pathology. But I think if we have these open and honest conversations with parents and teachers, then we can make sure that everybody understands that it's okay to be different. We don't all have to be perfect. And if this is not causing problems, it doesn't need to be addressed. Now, when we should step in is if the child is upset about it, if it's causing them to be stressed out, if they are unable to participate in things that they want to do, or it's affecting their ability to make and develop friendships and they are upset by that, then that's when we can step in and we can provide supports. Okay, so I'm not saying never work on it. I'm saying take a breath and pause and think about if it does need to be worked on right now, if it could be left alone, if maybe we could provide some indirect strategies in parent training just to get through that phase and see if it resolves on its own. There's other ways that we can support a child with this that aren't direct treatment. Okay, so there's my soapbox. Okay, so what do we actually work on? Let's assume that we need to move forward with treatment for whatever reason. We're going to first and foremost try to figure out what's causing it and address those underlying issues. Okay, we're not always going to know, but we can take a guess, try one of the tools from your toolbox that I'm going to give you here in just a minute, and pay attention to which strategies work, which ones seem to make it worse, because there will be some that make it worse, and which ones seem to be helping in other settings too. So we want to get parents and teachers in on the detective work as well. We want them to feel like they are part of the process, and we want to get that feedback from what's working in the real world. This will help you to not feel like you're being judged for not knowing what to do right away, because that's not how speech therapy usually works anyway. But sometimes we need to include other team members in on our process so that they get that and that they can help us. Okay, so I'm going to give you a big old list of strategies that you can try. And I want you to take this list, again, tools in your toolbox, start thinking about the child you're working with and say, okay, which of these things do I think may be playing into this? And just pick one. Pick one, try it, see how things go. Okay, first one is word finding. So if a child is having trouble thinking of the next word, they may be adding a filler to hold their place. We all know, especially with children, if you stop talking, someone else is going to jump in and talk next. And so this can be a subconscious method to hold our place in conversation. So working on word finding and helping them be able to retrieve words more quickly is something that can help. We do have word finding strategies inside our curriculum. Similarly, language skills. So some children, their language skills are delayed or they're struggling in the language skills in some capacity. So it takes them more effort, more brain effort, more cognitive load to think of what they want to say and to formulate how it's going to sound and to get it all spit out, right? So working on language skills with a child with a language delay may result in improvements in their disfluencies as well. Okay, so that's one area. We can also look at cluttering. So cluttering is when they speak very rapidly and they leave out a lot of sounds, word parts, smush things together, have sound errors. But the main feature is that it sounds very rapid. And then if you ask them to slow down, it gets better. So that's a very easy test to see if it might be a cluttering-like situation. Working on cluttering and having them slow down will likely improve these atypical disfluencies. Similarly, you can also work on stuttering. So if they have other types of disfluency that you can work on, that will also probably have a carryover effect to these word final stutters. Okay. There were a couple of the studies I saw today that said motor speech or phonological was tied in somehow, especially if you're noticing other types of motor speech or phonology problems, or you're noticing that the repetitions only occur on certain sounds. Maybe it's tied to the motor speech or the phonology, so you can address those. You can also and should also get a medical check. Ask parents, ask caregivers to make sure that there's not any breathing problems or respiratory problems. If you ever see new stuttering behaviors beyond the preschool age, so beyond like age 5, that's always a good reason to get a medical check. Just have the doctor check, maybe a neurological check, make sure there's not a reason that stuttering suddenly started. It does sometimes, but sometimes it can be caused by a neurological thing. So we just want to check that out. But getting the medical side of it cleared, always just peace of mind there. If we feel like it's tied to stress or anxiety, we can start introducing stress-reducing strategies or anxiety strategies, help parents and caregivers and teachers find ways to increase predictability in the child's routine, give them visual aids so they know what's coming, to just bring their nervous system back down so that their brain has more processing power. Let's see. Oh, we talked about this a little bit, but especially if it's a child under the age of 5, indirect fluency strategies are our bread and butter for that age. Children that are under 5 often go through phases of stuttering or disfluencies. And so we have a list of strategies. We've got them inside the curriculum, but you can find them elsewhere too, that are just indirect strategies that you can use to teach parents and caregivers and teachers different ways to communicate that alleviate the communicative pressure and support fluent speaking. Okay, so there's indirect strategies you can use there. If you do feel like there's an awareness issue, or if they're actually going the other direction where they're hyper aware of it and it's stressing them out, then you can work on the awareness and you can work on negative reactions. We have a Foundations for Fluency curriculum inside our curriculum platform that does include awareness and negative reactions in a very non-threatening way, helping them find figure out what underlying things are causing them to react negatively to their disfluencies, or helping them become more aware of it. So those are things that you can try as well. I will say, when I was going through my research, I found one study that was using the structured awareness therapy for word final disfluency. It has an abbreviation, but it's, again, structured awareness therapy for word final disfluency. So this study that I read was 20 participants, so small. This was bigger than most of the ones on word final disfluency, but still a very, very small sample size. And everybody using this particular protocol for speech therapy, they all improved, all 20 of them. The only thing that they did in therapy was just increase their awareness of it. They just went through a process of teaching them to be aware of their speech and notice when these things were happening. And all of those children decreased their word final disfluencies as a result of increasing their awareness. Okay? Here's the catch though. As I was reading through this, they also said that all of those children, all 20 of the participants, were not aware of their disfluency at first, not concerned by it at all, and that it was not impacting their ability to communicate with others. Okay? So my thinking here is, why did they do it? Do we need to put a child through therapy and spend this time, maybe pull them out of their classwork to go through this process if it's not having an impact, right? We always talk about educational impact, but we need to think about real world impact as well. To put a child through this and to show them that there's something wrong with them. And I know that sounds harsh, but that's basically what we're doing, is to say, oh, look at that, you did something wrong. If it's not causing problems, that feels not great to me. And then I also wonder, would that same resolution have happened as they aged anyway, without us ever having to spend time on this, without ever having to draw their attention to it? Maybe it would have just gone away on their own. If all they needed was to be aware of it, self-awareness increases with age, right? So I do wonder if it would have been interesting to have a longitudinal study and compared those 20 to 20 who didn't get the therapy, and would it have had the same outcome, And again, no criticism on the part of the researchers. They're trying to help us. They're trying to help us find strategies that work. And it sounds like this strategy did work. So if you do have a child who does need to address it, awareness is apparently a great place to start based on this study. Doesn't mean it's always going to work, but that's kind of where I don't know. That's where my brain went as I was reading this study. And I wanted to share that insight with you. All right. So finally, the last tool in your toolbox, the typical strategies we use for stuttering therapy. Some of those can also help with this type. So if we've gone through and we've looked at all these other factors and we just need to tackle this head on and give them some strategies that they can use to get through those moments of disfluency, then relying on our standard box of tools for stuttering treatment can help as well. So some of the ones that I particularly think might help, some of the fluency enhancing strategies, we have light articulatory touch, which is where you just make sure that your tongue and your lips are touching each other very lightly. So it's basically a way to reduce tension in the articulators. If everything's really tight and we teach them to touch things very lightly, then they're going to be less tense. Slow rate, obviously a great one to try. Continuous voicing or stretchy speech, where we stretch our speech out, might be a one to help. Or then stuttering modification strategies, specifically the pullouts and the cancellations. So a pullout is when you're already in a stutter and you stretch out through it. So if we're saying, I'm going to the store or, and then we kind of move through it if we feel like we're stuck. Or a cancellation is when you actually just hard stop and start again. So that one would be something we could try as well. So not a one-size-fits-all answer for your question. Thank you for the question. But hopefully that gives you some idea of some different strategies to try, or maybe just permission to not address it right now if it's not something that needs to be addressed. All right. Thank you all for listening today. I hope that you can submit a request as well, because I am excited to get your requests and actually give you answers that are specifically related to your cases. So you can go over to speechandlanguagekids.com/submit and submit that form for free. And that'll go into my bank and I'll choose the ones to feature on the podcast. Or if you need more immediate support, you can go to hub.speechandlanguagekids.com. That's where our subscription is housed. We also, in addition to all the training videos and courses and materials that are in there, we have a discussion board where you can come in and ask questions and you can chat with me privately as well. So I hope to see you on one of those, and we'll be back next week for more episodes and hopefully more case reviews. Bye for now.